Judge Olivia Carter had earned her reputation the hard way. She wasn't the kind of judge who played favorites or turned a blind eye. In fact, many feared her no-nonsense approach. She had a clear mission: to hold the corrupt accountable, no matter who they were. A single mother who had worked her way up from humble beginnings, Olivia understood the value of justice better than most. She wasn't afraid to make waves, and that made her a target for some of the city's most powerful people. Across from her in the dock stood a group of police officers, the very embodiment of corruption. They were used to bullying the vulnerable, to bending the law to fit their narrative. The public might have seen them as heroes, but Olivia knew better. She had spent months digging through reports, gathering evidence, and talking to the victims. These men weren't protectors. They were predators hiding behind badges. In this case, it could bring them down. Olivia could feel the weight of it. The world was watching, and she knew the stakes were high. If she ruled against them, the whole force could fall apart. But Olivia wasn't scared. She had seen it all before. As the trial progressed, the tension in the room mounted. The officers grew more agitated, more defensive. This wasn't just a case to them. It was a battle for their empire. The courtroom was tense as Judge Olivia Carter questioned the lead officer, Officer Daniel Hall. His answers were evasive, his demeanor arrogant. He had been trained to deflect, to deny, to manipulate the truth. But Olivia was sharper than he anticipated. She didn't back down, cutting through his lies with precision. "Your statement here doesn't match the evidence, Officer Hall," Olivia said, her voice firm. "You were at the scene when the victim was assaulted, yet you claim to have done nothing. Explain that." Hall's face reddened. The other officers sitting behind him exchanged nervous glances. They knew this wasn't going well for them. Hall shifted in his seat, trying to regain his composure. But Olivia wasn't letting him off the hook. She pushed harder. "I'm asking you one last time, Officer Hall," Olivia continued. "What exactly happened that day? Were you complicit?" The room fell into an eerie silence. The air was thick with the weight of her words. Hall opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say another word, his hand shot out. Slap! He struck her across the face. Gasps erupted from the spectators. Olivia, stunned, felt the sting of the blow, but she didn't back away. The room went silent, and for a moment, everything seemed frozen. Hall stood there, his face twisted with defiance, convinced that his badge would shield him from any consequences. But as the officers behind him exchanged uncertain glances, a deep realization began to sink in. He had done something they could never take back. He had slapped the wrong person. The slap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Everyone stood frozen, eyes wide, hearts racing. But it wasn't just the audacity of the slap that shook the room. It was the person he had struck. Judge Olivia Carter wasn't just any judge. She was a force of nature, a woman who had made a name for herself by dismantling corruption with grace and power. And now she had been disrespected in the worst way possible. For a long moment, Olivia didn't speak. Her cheek burned, but her eyes, they were ice cold. She wiped the sting away, then slowly, deliberately, rose from her seat. The room held its breath. Her gaze locked with Officer Hall's, and she spoke with calm authority, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, her words slow, deliberate, each syllable heavy with meaning. In the blink of an eye, the courtroom erupted. The bailiff moved swiftly, his hands firm as he approached Officer Hall, but Olivia held up her hand. "Not yet," she said, her eyes never leaving the officer. In an instant, she issued a court order for Hall's arrest. The officer, once so confident behind his badge, now stood dumbfounded, his arrogance evaporating into the air. But that was just the beginning. The cameras in the courtroom were rolling, capturing every moment. The world would see the fallout unfold in real time. As Officer Hall stood there, handcuffed and stunned, the courtroom buzzed with disbelief. The judge had just done something no one had expected. She had struck back, not with violence, but with the full weight of the law. Olivia's decision to have him arrested in front of everyone wasn't just symbolic, it was a message. News outlets that had been covering the case live immediately cut to breaking news. The viral video spread across social media platforms like wildfire, with millions of people watching in real time as the corrupt officer was carted away. People across the country began to demand justice. They were angry, but they were also emboldened. The system that had allowed this type of abuse to go on unchecked was now under siege. Within hours, investigative journalists were digging deeper into the police department's dark secrets. Old reports of misconduct, cover-ups, and racial profiling resurfaced. Anonymous tips started flooding in, pointing to a network of officers who had been running illicit operations for years. But the tipping point had been reached. No one could ignore what had happened in that courtroom. Olivia's act of courage had shattered the illusion of invincibility these officers had built for themselves. The police force that once terrorized the city with its unchecked power began to crumble. Investigations opened. High-ranking officials resigned, and for the first time in a long while, the corrupt empire felt the sting of true justice. As the investigation deepened, the cracks in the police department's empire grew wider. It didn't take long before the corrupt officers, those who thought they were untouchable, began to fall one by one. Internal Affairs launched a full-scale inquiry, and soon officers who had once been above reproach were facing charges for everything from abuse of power to organized crime. The city that had been ruled by fear now buzzed with the sound of justice being served. The police chief, who had long turned a blind eye to the misconduct, was forced to resign under pressure. Officers who had once walked the streets with impunity were now sitting in front of a judge, facing the very consequences they had ignored for so long. And then there was Officer Hall, the man who had thought his badge would protect him. Now he stood in a court of law, not as a protector of justice, but as a criminal. His empire, built on arrogance and corruption, had come crashing down. The fall of Officer Hall and his corrupt colleagues was just the beginning of a larger transformation. The city, once dominated by fear, began to heal. Olivia Carter's courage had sparked a movement, a reminder that no one, not even those in power, was beyond the reach of justice. And now it's up to all of us to stand up, speak out, and make sure stories like this are never forgotten. If you believe in justice, share this video. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire change. Let's make sure corruption doesn't win.